All right. Well, tonight's the big night. We're going to introduce and kick off the 2021 summer exhibition. And so we just throwing together this little kickoff event to um, welcome everyone to explore the photo galleries that we created. And so I'll just go ahead and kick it off here. I'll start by saying hello, my name is Tobin Stuff, and I just want to thank you all for joining the kickoff of the 2021 Summer Photography Exhibition. So glad you're joining us tonight and to celebrate the opening of these 4 virtual photography galleries created by Allison Lau, Shravanthi Kanekal, Yeana Kwagh, and myself. The purpose of tonight's kickoff event is to provide a brief overview of the summer exhibition, the introduction of the exhibitors, and an introduction to each of the photography galleries. So throughout the event here, feel free to post questions in the chat box at any time, and then we'll answer as many of those questions as we can at the end of the event here. So I'm just going to start by providing the context to this exhibition and why we created it. The idea for creating the summer exhibition was born at the start of this year. I love exploring cities and traveling, and during the pandemic, I couldn't do either of those activities. So then I began to pore over old photos I had and reflected on the photos I took in the past. And I realized I had many photos of the built environment, things such as things that we encounter on a daily basis, like streets, people, public spaces, building, nature, etc. And stories and themes around them started appearing. So I realized as I was thinking about these photos, I was thinking about them through the lens of a photographer and as an urban planner. So then I thought, what if I made a gallery out of some of these photos and made it virtual so others could see, even though we're far apart? And then I asked the question, what if there were other friends, fellow planners who have a passion for photography? And what if we could create multiple galleries around different stories of the built environment? So I invited a few friends, and I'm thankful we were able to, that they were able to partake in this experience. And, as I invited everyone that you see here tonight, we were able to meet over the next 5 months and discuss our ideas that we had for our exhibits and able to help each other out along the way. So all of that effort has led up to this evening and the 4 galleries that we're presenting to you and others over the course of the next 2 weeks. So as I mentioned earlier, the 4 exhibitors include myself, Allison Lau, Shravanthi Kanekal, and Yeana Kwagh. And it's funny, we're going to try the round robin of introducing ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull up my screen here. Give me 1 second. Okay. So we're going to try this here. And we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves. So I'm going to kick it off by introducing Allison. Allison has been experimenting with film since middle school when she salvaged her dad's Pentax camera. In college, she started exploring multiple exposure techniques on film while visiting family in Hong Kong. Allison's appreciation for cities and analog photography is a source of inspiration for her double exposure shots.
Thanks, Tobin. I'm going to introduce Yeana Kwagh. And Yeana is an ORISE Research Fellow at the US EPA's Urban Waters Program. She received her Master's of City Planning in 2020, where she studied land use and environmental planning, in addition to urban resilience. She considers herself a novice photographer, but has long believed that photography is a powerful storytelling tool.
And I have the great honor of introducing Shravanthi Kanekal, who is a flaneur at heart. Shravanthi loves pondering the hows and whys of cities. After practicing as an architect, she pivoted towards urban planning, combining her interest in the built environment with her passion for natural landscapes. Inspired by her father's film archives, she experiments with digital and analog photography in her quest to capture the beauty of cities.
Thanks, Yeana. And I know Tobin introduced himself, but he is a planner and an urban designer and the founder of 7521. Tobin's exploration of the built environment through his camera informs his work as a planner and brings him closer to aspects that make every place special. Regardless of its global or local travels, he reveals stories with his camera that he wants to share with the world.
All right. Now that we got our introductions out of the way, we'll move on to introducing our exhibits that we've been working on, as I mentioned, over the last 5 months. So we're going to start with Allison, followed by Shravanthi, Yeana, and myself as we introduce our exhibits. So we'll get right into it. And here we go. Allison, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to thank you all, friends and family, for coming out tonight to this launch event. And as Tobin mentioned, we've worked on this project since January. So your presence and support here really mean a lot to me. Now, my exhibit is a compilation of double exposures that I've taken over a span of 6 years on a film camera that was my parents'. Yeah. And I think they're here along with my brother and sister-in-law. Wanted to thank you, parents and family. So for this exhibit, I specifically chose photos that, to me, highlight the qualities of an urban environment. And I try to showcase the complexity of a city through the multiple layers of elements and subjects. I feel that the way we interpret our surroundings is also a very personal experience. So I included poems for some of the photos, which are a window to how I felt and my perspective while taking the photo. And so I hope everyone can have a chance to look at the photos, maybe find something that's interesting to them or amusing. And also a way to reflect on what you value and appreciate most in your own neighborhood or street or city. So thank you all. And I'll pass it on to Shravanthi.
Thanks, Allison. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. This is exciting. So my exhibit is titled Namma Bengaluru, which translates from Kannada to Our Bangalore. So it's a series of pictures that to show you scenes of everyday life in the city that I grew up in. And I guess when Tobin brought this idea to us, I was thinking about how during planning school, I spent a lot of time like researching and reading about Bangalore and just the development it's experienced over the last couple of decades. And because of that, how much it's changed and how that's affected the character of the city. So my attempt at these pictures is to capture everyday spaces and snippets of everyday life that like lend the city its character. And I mentioned this in my description. I guess I would just like to inspire people to pause and take in what surrounds them, similar to what Allison just said. I really enjoy taking some of these pictures, and I tried to be intentional about what I wanted to show about Bangalore. So yeah, I really appreciate this being given the space to share my images and appreciate the opportunity to share my city with you. And with that, I will pass it to Yeana.
Yeah, great. So my exhibit's called Define Urban. And the backstory for this exhibit was that, we were all, in urban planning school to study what is urban and what is planning. And it was kind of funny to realize that there actually isn't a standard definition for the term urban across the world. Yeah, at the same time, we were learning that 2/3 of the world's population is projected to live in urban areas by 2050. So, officially, the definition of urban varies by country, and usually it's defined by just pretty stale numbers of like population size or density or economic activity or the built form. And I just found it really interesting that everyone I talked to has their own assumptions of what makes a city and what a city should be like. And while there are really well-studied urban theories and planning practices and such, I really wanted to just take out all the academic and practitioner jargon and just, show some photos that highlight the actual lived experiences of some of these terminologies that we use to understand cities. And also just because it's really fun to share snapshots from around the world. All the photos in my exhibit, in case it needs to be clarified, because you might be surprised by some of them, they are all taken in jurisdictions designated as urban. And I attempted to organize them in 7 categories or themes to represent just a sampling of elements or considerations that go into what make up a city. Honestly, I could probably write like a whole essay for each like grouping of photos, but just for sake of time, I will give some, I think, planning context for those who might not be planners who are tuning in today that I think might help you get a little bit more out of the photos and the captions. So yeah, so the, in this first section, density, given the stat I said earlier about the projections of urban growth, density is going to be really necessary. It's going to be really necessary to build up in order to accommodate that growth. But with so much rapid development and planning of cities, it brings up really interesting questions about, whether a sense of community or a vibrant city can be something that's curated in these large-scale developments that are happening around the world. And another concern that comes with rapid urbanization and the population growth is if that growth outpaces the construction of adequate and affordable housing, which brings me to the second section of informality. Today over 1 billion people live in informal settlements, I believe. You might want to fact check me on the specific numbers, but informal settlements are also known as slums. And with these sets of photos, I really wanted to challenge some of the stigma that kind of comes with informality, and also comment on a lot of the class differences and the growing inequality that we see across the world today. In the next section, I zoom in a bit into different types of streetscapes. This one's maybe a little bit more self-explanatory. Streetscapes just referring to, how are streets designed to allow for the flow of traffic through the city. And so I present various types of street designs. Just for these particular 2 photo pairings, I thought I'd mention the context of the history of Chinatowns and a lot of the redevelopment and urban renewal that occurred in the 60s. So the photo on the left is Vine Street Expressway in Philadelphia, which actually cuts through the Chinatown. And that was a lot of Chinatowns were kind of obliterated, built over during this era. And so I juxtaposed that expressway with, the largest and oldest remaining Chinatown in the US in San Francisco. So, it's interesting how planning can, when done poorly, can be bad, but when done well, can really flourish for a community or really preserve a community and their homes. So the next category that I really want to include is sacred spaces. And this is something I want to include partially because I find that a lot of Americans, at least at planning school, tend to not think enough about the role that sacred spaces play in city planning and communities. And, they're really, really important to a large portion of the world, and they're very central to communities physically and socially. So, yeah, I just wanted to highlight sacred spaces as an important consideration for city planning. And yeah, some of the contrasts that you'll see adjacent to these sacred spaces are really striking. Obviously, as an environmental planner, I had to include a section on dealing with natural resources. And so this section plays a lot on this wild versus tamed nature duality to just really prompt some thoughts on how we can live with nature in our cities, and that cities don't have to be these concrete jungles per se. The next section is also pretty self-explanatory in terms of public spaces. I think it's most interesting to hear what types of public or semi-public spaces people tend to prefer. So, you know, that's an interesting point of introspection as you look through those photos. I will comment, actually, Tobin, can you go back to those first two photos? The significance of pairing these two photos together, I thought I'd comment is, you know, on the right is photos from the global climate strike in Philadelphia, and on the left, the gateway of India has been inundated from monsoon flooding and sea level rise threats. So I just really want to put that context of why those photos were juxtaposed to each other. And yeah, and for my last section, I wanted to end the note on adaptive reuse, which I think is just a really it's just about thinking creatively about land, space, and the resources that we have. And I just want to end on that note because I think it's really exciting to think about all the possibilities that can occur when we think about the ways that we could be adaptive and reuse existing materials and sources that we have in our cities. So yeah, that about sums up my exhibit. Thanks for listening. Now let Tobin share about his exhibit.
All right. Thank you, Yeana. So yeah, for my exhibit, it's titled Listen. And the whole background, I mean, I have it listed in the summary here, but the exhibit really focuses on the pairing of sound with photos, because obviously in photos, sound is normally lost or is lost. And so it's a very important part to the built environment, though. When we think about sound, that can, affect our feelings about what we're seeing or the space that we're in. It may be inviting to us, or it may push us away. And, in photos, you see a snapshot in time, but without sound, you may see a photo of a beautiful park, but, and when you see that photo, you may think of pleasant sounds based on what you see in the image. Trees, maybe you think of birds, maybe you think of peace, the feelings that you gain from that. But that's not always the case, though, in the actual built environment. It may be a beautiful scene, but it might be surrounded by highways, which then, is that fully inviting? Does that create a memory that you want to keep, or is it something that you forget? And so, as a planner, thinking about sound is very important to how we engage with communities and how we think about spaces that are created or preserved, or any of the work that we do. I think sound is something that's not always thought about deeply or engaged with community. So that was really a big background to my exhibit. So my exhibit is basically broken down into four parts. One is a sound appetizer. It has a collection of sounds from different areas within Philadelphia. That's where these photos originate from. So there is one link to the Delaware River from the city that is called Race Street. And to get to the river from Old City, it's a short walk, but you have to cross under Interstate 95. There's the Market Frankfurt subway line. There's also other highways and roadways that creates a ton of sound, and it creates really a barrier to accessing what is a pleasant area along the river. And so that's kind of that makes up the introduction there. You have the next section called a barrier, where it walks you through the photos of going through this from Old City to the waterfront, and kind of the barriers that are encountered. And in these photos, I actually photographed them to leave out vehicles because, when you hear the sounds, which that's the intent of this, that you pair it with sound of the recordings in here, that even though you don't see cars, by hearing them, you can imagine the cars going by in the photo. At least that's my hope. The next section is all about peace and different scenes along the riverfront and how that pairs with sound that was recorded in the approximate locations. And so, some of them you'll be able to pair with the photos, and then others you might have a little bit more of a challenge. And that's kind of the intent of challenging you on some of your assumptions that you have when you see photos based on sounds. And so that gets me to the last part here of the last section of my exhibit, which I called Upside Down. And it's really kind of taking some of the things, as I mentioned in my introduction here, that you may see a beautiful photo and you might think of certain sounds, but what happens when those sounds don't align with what you see? So that's how I end it. I leave it open-ended, and it's just a way of encouraging you to, not always kind of imagine what you see in a photo, because it may be different. And from a planner's context, it could be really helpful of thinking about what places can become, and not what they may be restricted to based on the environment that you see in a photo or that you see on the ground in person. Because what the pandemic has really revealed is, when the cities first, or across the country, when we stayed home and everything shut down for a little bit, cities went quiet. They became peaceful. There's a lot of things where you might think of areas that would be really noisy, and they actually became very peaceful. And so, how can we challenge some of those assumptions as our cities reopen, as we get back to moving again? Do we have to stay with those assumptions that places like this could be noisy and not inviting, or could they become something different? So that's really the intent of this. And, ultimately, as you go out and explore the built environment, or the next time you go to the grocery store, or wherever it may be, that you think about the built environment just a little bit different. And so, yeah, all the exhibits are now open. You can access them from the exhibitor profiles page, where you see our little blurb about ourselves, and then the button to access our exhibits. So they are now open. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so you can see all of us. And yeah, we're just going to move into a time now of taking any questions that you have. So there's a chat function. I believe there's also like a Q&A function too. But if you have any questions, feel free to type them in and we'll answer them. But while you all are thinking of your questions or typing them in, I can start us off with one question that I wrote down, and to ask all of us, that we can have a discussion on. And one of those questions are, for each of us, what have you learned by taking part of this exhibition? So obviously, as we put together our galleries and thought about all the different photos we've taken, yeah, like, what have you learned by taking part of this? I mean, I can speak for myself, jump in by saying, I learned there's a lot of photos, that I've taken over the years. And I think that's something that we all discussed off and on over the past couple of months as we helped each other out, of saying, we have to, we could do hundreds of photos, but for our sanity and for everyone else's sanity, we tried to narrow it down as much as we could to a narrative or to a point of view that could that we presented tonight. So, lesson learned, I guess, for me is to continue to look through my old photos and try to think about how I can categorize them or kind of bundle them and really make sense of them. Because I think for a lot of us, we take a lot of photos without always thinking, and they just become, out of sight, out of mind. So yeah, I think that's something I learned, is to think about photos a little deeper. Yeah.
I guess I can share the thought is, yeah, I just really enjoyed this whole process, because I mean, I knew I loved photography, but I don't think I ever really just like talked about it very much with with like in this type of way, so interconnected to like my profession. And it was just really cool to be really introspective about, yeah, what do I think about when I am taking a photo and choose what should be in the frame or what to focus on. And I'm realizing how like my photos really are indicative of how I view and navigate the world, because that's like what I'm trying to capture. And it's been especially interesting to, I only really had like an official nice camera for about a little over a year, like a year and a half. And so before that, it was a lot of like iPhone photos and like little point and shoot cameras from my family. But it's really cool to see how my photos have changed since like with planning school, and afterwards was when I had got my nice camera. So it was really cool to see how like what I choose to even take photos of shifted a bunch, like after graduating from planning school and getting that training too. So it was a lot of introspection that I wasn't expecting when you first asked me, Tobin, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I also agree with Yeana and Tobin in that though just revisiting the photos that I've taken over the past years and noticing things that I haven't seen before in the photos. And also just giving me the opportunity to share more of the photos with friends and family and hearing about what they think of the photos or like what they see. And that interaction has been, yeah, quite rewarding for me, because I feel like everyone sees something different. And that's the element of surprise and brings me a lot of joy. So I'm really appreciative of this process of being able to reflect on my photos more carefully.
It's great.
Yeah,
Shravanthi?
basically everything that you guys just said, because yeah, it was tough to kind of like go back to all of my pictures, because I have a ton of pictures to kind of like sort through that and see the intention in some of those pictures, because I also am one of those people who taken a ton of pictures but haven't paused to think about maybe all of them. So yeah, that was definitely something that made me, I guess, has kind of taught me to be more intentional about what I want to be focusing on. And yeah, everything that you guys said already. So
It's great. Well, we do have a few questions that have come in. The first one is, who is a photographer you look up to and why? Anyone have off the bat? It's really funny for that question that came up, because next week we will be sharing out some videos. We actually, the four of us, we had a separate recording of a roundtable discussion. And one of those questions was, if I recall correctly, like what are some bloggers or photographers that we follow that inspire us? And yeah, so there'll be a more in-depth response to that. But I think if there's anyone in particular that you want to give a shout out to, Yeana?
Yeah, I can go. The first photographer's name that I really knew and came to recognize and really love his work is Steve McCurry. And he is a really famous photographer for National Geographic. So he does a lot more of like photojournalism styled photography. And yeah, I think I just love the quality of his photos, and it just really captures stories and can transport you to different parts of the world. And I think he has a unique ability to capture really intimate moments that I really admire, that is clearly evident of the relationships he builds in a lot of the places, in most of the places that he takes photos. So yeah, Steve McCurry, I highly recommend you check out his work.
Nice.
I think not a particular photographer, but I do appreciate street photography a lot. I think Humans of New York, but also recently found out about Chinatown Pretty, which is a group of people in San Francisco's Chinatown that takes like portraits of seniors in Chinatown and showcase like their fashion and their outfits along with like a little snippet of their story. And I find that really, I don't know, meaningful. And I personally don't take portraits of people and I don't have an interest to, but I really enjoy that type of content.
Nice. So yeah, as I said, we'll have a segment next week that will talk about some additional inspirations that we find, including people that we follow. We want to get to another question here. What advice do you have for amateur photographers who are unsure of where to start? I guess one thing I would say is just, I mean, it sounds basic, but it's like just start shooting different photos. You just go out and take photos and explore. And I think through trial and error, you kind of discover what you like and maybe some things that, you know, you may not find as interesting. So over time, you kind of gravitate towards, I think, what you'll photograph, what you find interesting. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Shravanthi?
guess that's pretty good advice, Tobin. And I guess I would just kind of add to that saying, I feel like don't let technology be a hindrance, because I mean, you have like cameras everywhere now, and like I know that I take a lot of pictures with like an iPhone camera, and I have been like for at least a couple of years. So yeah, that definitely shouldn't be something that kind of stops you from taking a good picture.
Yeah, because it actually came up in some of our discussions about, you know, do you need the best gear? And really, it's not about the gear. It's about having that eye that you form just by going out and exploring. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know, just because I identify as a more novice photographer, I didn't buy like a nice camera until I felt like I outgrew iPhone photography, and I'm not quite sure how to articulate how I sensed like when I outgrew iPhone photography. I just know that at some points, like I started feeling really limited by like the capabilities of just my iPhone, and there were certain moments that like I was like, okay, I definitely need something a little bit more savvy. But so only then did I decide to invest in one. So yeah, I'm pro working with what you have.
Great. Okay, let's see. Another question. When you want to take photos of people in public, how do you go about taking a photo without drawing attention or invading someone's privacy? Yeana, I know that you had you've talked about that point in our discussions before, and I think, yeah, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of I think the privacy thing is really, really important. And I kind of alluded to that in what I said about what I admired about Steve McCurry, the photographer I respect, in that I think it's really important to ideally like take photos of people who you have some form of relationship with. I think with street photography, when people are just like bustling and running around, it's pretty easy to just kind of like just shoot a photo really easily without people feeling like you're being invasive. But I think photographers, there's definitely a lot of ethics that are involved with photography that I feel like should be talked about more. And relationship building, or even just asking for permission sometimes when I'm like, especially if it's like a project related photo I'm taking, is something that I think is really, really important. And so if there's ever an instance where I notice that people are uncomfortable around me by my presence, by my camera that's up, or there's like some level of distrust, I just like put the camera down, because like no matter how good the potential shot is, because I don't think it's worth just like losing some of that trust or making people feel uncomfortable.
It's tricky. And I know like if you were hired or contracted for taking photos in different spaces, there's kind of legal ways that you can get by, covering yourself on the protection side of that. But I think in terms of just going out and taking photos in the public, yeah, it's what Yenna said of just being respectful of everyone's space. And even though it may be a public space where people are, if there are people who are visibly discomforted by being in a camera view, I always try to respect that because ultimately, when I take photos of public spaces, I don't want to have the photos full of like people being uncomfortable, right, of my presence. So, sometimes that's just by, um, I would say from my own experience of trying not to like linger too long of like, you're always like trying to find like the right view through like the camera lens. Um, I try to avoid that at all costs. It's like as you walk and you kind of see something that catches your eye, I'll try to get a photo of that or a few photos and then kind of keep moving so that it's not creating a big scene of like, hey, I'm here and I'm taking photos, all around me. And I think in that way, it's a way to get a slice of just, what's just happening there in that moment instead of trying to find the right moment. So, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, Shravanthi.
Sorry, yeah, no, I just wanted to jump in really quick and just say, for me, in my experience, it's and this is my experience in India. I guess when you're taking a picture from a distance and like people are a bit far away, it's um, that to me has been like easier. But as you go in a bit like closer, and it's a little bit more of like an intimate shot of someone, I've found that it's definitely been easier to like strike a conversation, and that like you can check the temperature if someone's just like not interested. I guess you kind of that gives you your answer. But if you strike up a conversation, and if that kind of like eases the tension as well. So that has been helpful for me. But I mean, I'm not the most outgoing person, so I haven't done that like every single time. But I have done that on a few occasions, and that has been helpful.
Great. Let's see. Another question we have. Can you speak more on how your four exhibits work together in ways they might complement or contrast with each other? So I know for us, we all kind of we didn't work to coordinate them, but I think the intent as we're moving along closer to finalizing our exhibits and through our discussion, it really kind of revealed that there's different kind of stories of the built environment that are created, and so that's kind of the intent of bringing the four of these together. Is that they each speak to a different story or a different topic of the built environment because it's so vast. I mean, it covers everything that we see when we go outside, and there's all kinds of perspectives that we can cover through our exhibits. So I think that's probably the closest thing that brings us all together, our exhibits together, is that narrative around there's different stories, different flavors of the built environment and how you look at it. And that's, what we hope that you take away from it, that there's many different perspectives, and, you can also find your own perspective through it as well. Is there anything I missed? Anything that you want to add to that?
I think something that I observed, at least around all four of us, our work and just our personalities too, is I think we're all just very curious people. And I think that's what made part of this exhibition development so fun. And I think all our photos are just so exploratory of our environments and introspective of how we are navigating them ourselves, and then wanting to invite people into that experience. So in that sense, I think maybe that's just building off of to your point, Tobin, about like the storytelling aspects of it.
Great.
The differences in style are kind of interesting to think about too, just in terms of like the stylistic differences. I think in some ways Shravanthi and I might be a little bit similar. I think we take a very like similar approach a little bit in photos, and then Allison's style is distinctly like double exposure, and like super artsy in that kind of way. I feel like my photos are just like very straightforward, and it's like, this is density. This is informal. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all also trying to explore the question around how photography can be incorporated into the planning process of how to make communities better for the people who live there. And I think we all bring in different perspectives and experiences, and I think, you know, our exhibits complement each other in that way.
Yeah, definitely. Because I know, like Allison, for your photos, I think you wrote that, you know, even though you overlay like a double exposure, you overlay scenes, you kind of try to emphasize some aspects of them that they stand out. But it's more of that invoking, I guess. You can explain it better, but it is like that way of like highlighting or emphasizing certain points, right?
Yeah, and I think also, as I was mentioning earlier, I think, yeah, when I show the photos to people, I feel like everyone has a different response as to like what they notice. And that's kind of indicative of, I think, how we experience our own environments. You know, something may pop out to us or be more meaningful to us just because of our past, and and yeah, what this place means to us.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and you know the way that we discussed it, or that we had in our discussions, was how you can apply what we're sharing with you. You know, there's really a spectrum of, as Yeana said, you have more of like a photo journal approach, kind of like documenting different scenes, different themes from the built environment, to more interpretive type of photos. And then even for my exhibit of introducing sound is another layer to photos, and how you can either pair them or separate them. It all gets at like, you know, engaging with dialogue with people that you're sharing these photos with, of conversations, of questions that arise. And ultimately, I think from a planning perspective, it's really having discussions around, well, how do we make a place, you know, how do we invest differently in the place? How do we make it better? How do we strengthen this or highlight an important aspect? And yeah, all of this is different ways on the spectrum to have those conversations. Yeah. So we have one more question here, and then I think we'll call it a night, so that all of you who joined us, which we're very happy to have, to go and explore our exhibits and enjoy what we have. But the question that we have here is, do you have any next projects? And could you also talk about the challenges that you had while developing your exhibit for this exhibition? So kind of a two-parter. Anything coming down the pipeline, and the challenges that you had while creating this project? Yeah. What I would say is, in terms of, you know, future work, this has been a really great experience. And what you see here tonight, there's 4 of us, but there's actually several more who were initially part of this effort. And so who knows, maybe there'll be a winter exhibition. That'd be fun. And others, I know as we started working on putting this together, there actually was more interest from other friends as well as other people in our network. So perhaps that can be a winter event. So maybe stay tuned for that. Yeah. Yeana?
So I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I also just feel awkward about silences. So I'm just like, I'll just say something. But yeah, I'll speak to the challenges part. Yeah, I don't necessarily have any specific creative works in mind to follow up, but I think this certainly ignited an interest to just, I don't know, tap into photography more seriously. So maybe there will be a future project, but to be determined. But I think I personally, and I think all of us probably struggled a lot with just, what, even once we narrow down the photos we want to share, how we choose to lay it out, what progression and order, what caption to put under them to tell enough to get the most out of the photos, but without like spoon feeding it to the viewer. It was really challenging. And I've had so many different iterations of layouts, orders, caption situations. Like I said earlier, I could probably write like a full-on essay for like almost every photo, just because there's just so much, there's just like so much that's going on in these photos or the pairings of photos. So
that could be your next project.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think for me, so how I've been doing the double exposures is that I'll take one photo and then the next photo after that will be laid on top. But recently I started taking photos all on one roll, and then my next move is to, once I'm finished with that one roll, I'll like take it out again and shoot pictures on top of it. So it's not consecutively layered upon each other. And I've thought about it in terms of how it'll add like a dimension of time to how I interpret the photos. And I think that'd be interesting to explore for me.
I don't know if I have anything in the pipeline, but this process and my co-panelists have definitely inspired me to get, I guess, like be more serious about my photography. And I think this process has also kind of made me want to integrate photography into my planning work more than I guess I'm not sure if I've done it in the past, or maybe I have done it unintentionally, but I guess it's forcing me to think more intentionally about my work, the intersection of my planning work and photography.
Great. Well, yeah, I think we're gonna wrap it up there. Again, we just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And as I mentioned, that we did do a recording for a roundtable discussion, so where there's many more questions that we discussed and also shared some laughs along the way. So, and hopefully some insightful answers. But that will be coming out here soon. But in the meantime, please go enjoy our exhibits and the photos that we have to share with you. And yeah, again, thank you so much tonight. All right, take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.